Hey, welcome to Keep On Pushing TV. I am your host, Devon Harris. And yeah, man, you know what we do, right? We share ideas and insights that are going to challenge you and inspire you to keep on pushing and live your absolute best life. So if that's something you're interested in, you know you're in the right place. So again, welcome to Keep On Pushing TV. Our guest today is a Canadian skeleton athlete. He has competed in 3 world championships, won a silver medal in the 2008 championship in Altenburg, Germany. That year, he also finished second overall in the World Cup standings. He's won about 3 different World Cup races. Of course, he's an Olympic athlete. He took home the gold in skeleton, of course, in the 2010 Olympic Games in Vancouver. Since his time on the slopes, he's become a television host, a philanthropist, a motivational keynote speaker. Um, just last year, 2019, he got inducted into the Manitoba Sports Hall of Fame. He also works as a sales consultant and an automobile auctioneer. But outside of that, a really cool guy. I think you're going to enjoy meeting him. So pleased to welcome John Montgomery to the show. John, welcome to Keep On Pushing, brother.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the invite, Devin.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming on. You know, I often joke about your sport, John. I often say that the reason it's called skeleton is because by the time you get to the bottom of the track, that's all that's left. What would get in the mind of somebody who is supposedly of sound mind to jump on a lunch tray and go head first down a bobsled track at 80 miles an hour?
You said supposedly of sound mind, and that's the key word there, supposed. You know what, though? You look at the number of people who do skeleton racing, and it's very few. And then you break down who those individuals are, and you would be probably gobsmacked to figure out how many of them have high-level educations like PhDs and doctorates and master's degrees in education and the likes, because they are individuals who may seem a little bit daft, but most of them are using skeleton as a means to an end, as a vehicle to realize a dream. And when you find a low sort of profile sport or something on the periphery like skeleton is, with very few participants, if you are maybe clever enough, keen enough, astute enough to recognize opportunities when you see one, you might see skeleton as the sport where you can maybe make it. And for me, that's really what it was. It was a means to an end. Now, I was so passionate about the sport that I would be able to see myself through all the low points. Not everybody can do that because they don't have the passion for actually sliding like I maybe did. But everybody, I think, is there for the same reason. And it's to represent their country on the world stage at the Olympic Games with only like a little bit of athleticism and a whole lot of maybe dreams or hopes or desires. And between those two things, you find that space to get yourself involved in what seems to be a harebrained sport of skeleton racing. But for lots of us, it was a means to an end. And we always joke, you have to take the piss out of your sliding brothers and sisters, because the bobsleds, we called them the backseat buffaloes, and we called the lugers. You don't want to do luging, because luging is
a loser.
and if you can't laugh at your sliding brothers and sisters as well as yourself as a Skeletor, you're in the wrong game, brother.
Yeah, that's true, man. So it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that, you know, a lot of skeleton athletes or Skeletors are, you know, highly educated people, because that's the same in bobsledding as well. And you wonder what you may very well be right. It is an opportunity to go do something that you have always wanted to do. I find that to be true in my case, for sure.
We always point the sliding sports as maybe bobsled and or skeleton particularly. Luge, you seem to have started at a fairly formative age, like 10, to be able to become a competitive luge athlete. That may not be the case anymore, but they do have a longer learning curve perhaps. but we always called bobsleigh and skeleton the post-secondary sport, because you would recruit from college athletics and people that didn't want to necessarily leave the gridiron or the track field or the rugby pitch, or in my case, the hockey rink. They didn't want to leave that sport behind, but there really wasn't anything to graduate into. We weren't making the big shows in any of those sports. So we found ourselves with a little bit of athletic talent in these other post-secondary sports. And you usually came to it through university. And maybe that's where this level of education stems from. But you find yourself meeting all kinds of really fascinating people with some dynamic and interesting and colorful backgrounds from, even in your case, I mean, one of the Russians we knew was a former sniper in the military. And then you see him pushing this bobsled, and you're like, that guy's a stone cold killer. My God, who am I hanging out with these days? One of them was a world champion arm wrestler. And these are the types of cats that you get to crisscross the globe with, tobogganing. So it was, as you know, really remarkable.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, John, because a story I've never told public, and this was in La Plania during the Olympic Games. My brakeman and I, we went over to the Russian room to exchange some kit. You know, they competed as a unified team, but they did wear the uniform that says, you know, USSR. Oh. And so I wanted a piece of history, man, because that was going out of style, so to speak. And so we're there transacting our business. Obviously, they don't speak English, I don't speak Russian, but we're negotiating. And in walked this guy in full Russian military garb. And I got transported to one of those espionage movies. I was so sure I was going to be kidnapped.
That's the last thing you want to see.
Yeah, and perhaps the most shocking thing about it was, this is a guy I saw on the bobsled track for 4 years. Never knew he was Russian military, you know, so interesting. So how did you get into into skeleton anyway?
Just by chance. I was on a self-guided tour with my parents who didn't live in Calgary. It was their first visit to see where I was now calling home in the, we're going to call it late February of 2002. This was 1 week after the 2002 Winter Olympic Games had concluded in Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. And I was still on cloud nine, reveling in our men's and women's hockey team gold medals, which is what I sort of identified with at the time, being a hockey player from past. And I had a gentleman from my hometown, a hometown hero. My community is 1,600 people. And one of the guys from my hometown was on that men's hockey team. His name was Theron Fleury. And he is the smallest player ever to play in the NHL. And as the smallest kid on the ice my entire hockey career, and also having the smallest guy in the NHL from my hometown of 1,600 people, I can't begin to tell you what that meant to me in terms of goal setting, in terms of aspirations, in terms of building resolve that big things could happen to little guys from little towns. Theron was this shining beacon of hope to me. And he had won an Olympic gold medal the week before with the men's hockey team. And I'm still in this sort of drunken stupor of love and admiration for sports and Canadiana and the Olympianism. And my parents came to town, and we were doing a self-guided tour of Canada Olympic Park, COP, which you're, of course, familiar with. And going on over at the bobsled track, I could hear this commotion, and it was building in amplitude, and it goes, whoosh. And I didn't see anything rather above the short wall. So I just assumed that it was a luge race. And I was like, Mom, Dad, come on, we have to go watch this luge race. This is what I'm going to try next after I just tried speed skating. This is going to be it, maybe. And I'm like, oh my God, why did we ever have you, sort of a thing. And and these were the sorts of sports that spoke to my heart. And as we approached the track, I saw this sled come past me at about 125 kilometers per hour. The athlete on their stomach, face first, toes pointed, head draped over the end of their sled, hands at their side at this breakneck speed, going into Kreisel. And I thought that I was witnessing a horrible luge accident. And then another sled comes past, and another one, and another one, and another one. And they're all in the same fashion. And that was my first introduction to skeleton racing. I found out what it was, how I could try it. And a week later, I was on that same track doing my very first of 4 descents that night. And that would be my only 4 runs that winter. In winter of 2002, I'd have to wait till that next fall to get back involved. And I got a phone call out of the blue to come and do an early driving school to get my license. And before November, I was in my first really international competition for the America's Cup. And that was in the late year of 2002. And that began my journey.
Wow. So you saw it and were you a speed junkie? Let me ask you that first.
I had gifted myself a tandem skydiving experience on the day that I graduated from college. Nobody would come with me, so I went by myself. And I came home with this video and showed all my friends what I had done that day. And I very much enjoyed speed, but I am the type of individual that doesn't have a really long attention span either. So the metrics that are skeleton would just naturally dovetail quite nicely with who I am as an individual. And right. It was serendipitous, let's just say.
Yeah, I can see that. So you enjoy speed. I read that, so you grew up as an athlete looking for a sport to do. And skeleton discovered you. You discovered skeleton. How would you describe that?
You know what? It's one of those things. You can play with the words. Sometimes something will discover you, but you'll never discover anything without an active participation in things that are outside your comfort zone, I believe. And I believe that skeleton found me, but I had my eyes open and I was looking, and I was an active participant in that quest for something. And I wasn't looking for anything growing up. I had all that I needed in terms of the types of things that would allow me to fill my time, stay out of trouble, and appease my parents in terms of not destroying the house. And that was sports in hockey, golf, baseball, and whatever else we could access modestly in our really small rural town of Manitoba. But I was on the hunt for something when I moved to Calgary. My hockey playing days were over. I had been in the gym essentially trying to look better in a t-shirt type training, bodybuilding, with not much success, as I'm sure you can tell, being an endo or ectomorph body type. That's a hard road to hoe for a guy like me. So I was looking for a sport, something to test my mettle against other people, to challenge myself, to compete. And when I saw skeleton, and then when I tried it, I didn't have to look any further. I knew that I had found something that I could sink my teeth into, so to speak, that I could call my own and that I could run with. And I knew that was part of the recipe. I had to have those elements. It didn't matter what it was, but I had to love it. And I had to have passion for it, because undoubtedly any journey that's worth embarking on, where you've got lofty goals, and especially if it's, trying to represent your nation at that big bad sporting event that they call the Olympic circus with the 5 rings, there's going to be trials and tribulations, and the only thing that's going to ever see you through that is love and passion.
So you mentioned some really salient points there. Let me try and go through some of them. You said that you have to be active in the discovery of whatever it is that you are trying to discover or discover you. Is that the message you would give to, say, a young kid who's leaving high school, or a mother who's looking to go back in the job field, or someone looking to switch career perhaps? What do they do how do they go about their search?
There's a number of ways of looking at it. And I've heard some people say that you have to fail faster, that failure is inevitable. So fail faster. It's about finding out all the things that you don't want to do. And when you're active in an approach, when you're active in a quest, in a designed effort to find something, it's more about finding out along the way what it is that you don't want, because quite often you don't necessarily know. Your vision isn't 100% solidified. It's a feeling more than anything, an impetus, a pull in that direction. And if you can step into it without having a clear vision of where you're going to end up, that's the right process to be on. That's the right thing to have. You don't have to know where you're going to end up. That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to get out there, to practice, to fail faster, to try all the things that you maybe want to do, and then learn what it is that you don't want to, because through that approach, through that exercise, and failing, through trying things, through discovery, you will narrow it down quite dramatically, and it will come into focus, and it will become more clear through that active approach. And it's really hard to do sometimes because of that fear, the fear of the unknown. The fear is basically the root cause of everything that is undesirable in our lives. But when we can embrace fear, when we can lean into it, when we can leverage it, that's when I think the magic happens, man.
Yeah, man, cool. Yeah, let's jump back to Manitoba real quick. 1,600 people, you said, live in your town,
Yeah.
and from that small town, the two small guys, perhaps the two smallest guys in the town, come back with two Olympic gold medals, huh?
Yep.
What does that say, John, about um, about conventional wisdom, about what the experts would say about what it is that we can or cannot do. Here it is that Fiorin Fleury is a guy that many people deem too small to play in the NHL, but he did, and went on to inspire you to become an Olympic champion yourself.
I'm glad you asked that. Just in the asking of the question, I'm getting goosebumps for real. That's not being contrived. The hair on my arms is standing up on end because of what I know. And what I know is that belief is the underlying root cause of anything that is manifested, anything that is realized, and it's belief. Why does a small island nation of Jamaica produce the best sprinters the world over? It's not necessarily because they're intrinsically different than other small, perhaps island nations. It's because they've been shown a pathway to success. They idolize, revere, and hold up those who have embodied these traits of sprinting ideals. And then from that, you build a strong base of education and sprint coaches. And then you can imbibe students coming up through the ranks from all levels that this is a means to an end. This is a means by which we can celebrate our national identity on the world stage because we have identified something that we're gifted at, we're good at, and we can breathe life into individuals who never would have had a chance to do sprinting on the world stage if it weren't for the fact that they were here in Jamaica. And it's the same thing with Russell, Manitoba. We have a community of people that led us to believe that we were more than just the basic individuals, that we could be more as the sum of our parts. And when we were playing team sports growing up, hockey was the pathway forward for anybody that was looking for athletic success in these small towns, because that's where the vast majority of the resources and talents laid in coaching. And if you were a part of our hockey team, my hockey team growing up, you would have been proxy to 8 provincial gold medals of varying degrees and a Western Canadian Bantam bronze medal. And that's from a town of 1,600 people. And we were punching way above our weight because our parents gave us the opportunity, because we believed, and because there were examples before us of success, and we saw them. And when you're the smallest kid in your class and you see the guy from your hometown playing against giants, you somehow say to yourself that this is a possibility. It's not a pie in the sky type thinking, that it is rooted in reality. And if it can happen to him, if he's from my hometown, surely if I use some of the things that I know that he did, like hard work, education, then I too can prevail and I can have some level of success. And I think that it's telling of what the power of belief can do to a community. And when a community believes in individuals, the whole ship rises.
Indeed. Belief, having a community believing in you, you believing in yourself. You know, the word I tend to use, as you referred to Jamaica and sprinting, is expectation.
Yep.
And I think, you know, you do well, and people tend to rise to the expectation that others have of them, because you kind of create that same level of expectation in yourself as well. And so, you know, whether it's sports or sales or whatever it is, you know, just having that belief and developing that a high level of expectation that you're going to do well, and perhaps not just do well, but dominate, definitely will impact performance for sure. You mentioned the word fear, and you know, when I think of bobsledding, one of the words that come to mind is fear, because I'm not like you, a speed junkie. I'm actually scared of speed and height. So I guess I'm either not that well educated or all that smart. I'm not sure which it is. But talk to us, John, a little bit about fear, the role it plays, and you started alluding to it earlier, but the role it plays in our ability to succeed or not succeed.
I think our ability to embrace fear is a strong marker for our ability to achieve a level of success that we can be proud of. And if we can embrace the fears, there is no point in telling ourselves that we're not afraid. There is no point in trying to deny something that is real. And fear, wherever it's coming from, whether it is rooted in reality, or if you're scared of, getting struck by lightning, which is pretty unrealistic and not a strong possibility, your body's reaction to that fear is the same. You cannot deny it. But training your body to maybe ease into it, to embrace it, to leverage it, and to not have it be debilitating. Maybe we can use the example of public speaking, for instance. When you get up on stage, Devin, do you ever get a sense of butterflies in your stomach? And I only ask that because I still do after having done countless of presentations. Do you get that nervous anticipation?
I get it's a little bit like bobsledding. I get it before I go on stage. The minute,
like almost immediately before, when they start to read your bio, the nervous anticipation. When I was sliding, I used to get nervous peas and yawn a little bit because my breathing would get messed up, and your body yawning is a physiological response to improper breathing. But the nervous peas, that sort of thing, none of this would cause me to dwell on that fact that I was nervous. I would embrace it. I would ease into that. It meant that I cared. And if I'm going on stage and I have nervous anticipation and I touch my palm with my fingertip and I can feel it slightly sweating, that isn't debilitating for me. That is something that I almost expect now and I look for and I embrace, because it means that I care. And when it stops happening, it means that I don't give two hoots anymore. And
I get worried if I don't feel nervous. Yeah,
that's just it. Like, why aren't I nervous? Do I not give a shit? Like, what's happening here? I need to get my headspace right. Like, I need to be nervous almost.
Yeah.
And that sense of nervous anticipation, whether it's talking to a stranger, asking for a promotion, asking for a job, going to an interview, embrace that sense of uneasiness. Make it something that you're familiar with. And then when it is familiar, I'm going to add some French in here. When
there
it is
you go.
Yourself, then it doesn't have to be a stranger anymore. You can welcome this sense of uneasiness into your home like it's a good buddy from across the street. You're going to have a pint. You know that as soon as your lips start moving, buddy's going to disappear. He's out the door. He doesn't want to listen to you talk at all. He's heard this speech 1,000 times. He's just here to remind you that, yeah, you care. Yeah, this is important to you. And yeah, you got to do the work. You got to continue to invest in yourself, because expecting it to go away, I think, is the wrong mindset. Use fear.
Indeed. Yeah. So we have to embrace it. We have to, as you say, invite it in, acknowledge that it exists, because doing otherwise, I guess, makes us more fearful, disempowers us, and then obviously causes us not to achieve.
You can lie to your landlord, but you cannot lie to yourself. You always know you're talking smack, and your body it'll shut you down. Whether it's not acknowledging the fact that you've got life's stresses that are weighing down upon you heavily, whether it's somebody else's trauma that you are taking on. If you don't acknowledge it, your body it'll tell you in really profound ways. And if you let it go too long, sometimes it gets too far.
There you go. So we were talking about achievement earlier. So you started skeleton in 2002. You're at the Olympics in 2010, 8 years later. I'm assuming you didn't find yourself a natural, so to speak, when it came onto skeleton. Was there a steep learning curve? What were some of the challenges you had there?
That has to be part and parcel of success is really sucking in the beginning, because I was honestly probably the worst of all the new recruits. In the year that I came in, there was a heavy push to find new athletes. It wasn't for another year and a half that would mark Vancouver Whistler being awarded the 2010 games. That happened on July the 3rd of 2003. So it was about a year and a half after I discovered the sport for myself that I would get to set that BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal in 7 years' time, being the 2010 games. But getting involved and learning the sport, it was, I didn't know where it was going to lead until the 3rd of July, 2003. And on that day, I made that goal, even though I was still really, really sucky. And I had to battle. It took 2 seasons, really, where I had my ass handed to me. I was getting beat down. I didn't get it. I was slower than a lot of all the new people. In the second season, I was slower than some of the people that had just started that year by the end of the year. And I was really frustrated. And I lost my sled 7 times at the last race of the season in Lake Placid, New York, my very first time there. I crashed 6 times out of Shady 2 at 110 kilometers per hour, hitting that short wall coming out of that corner too early. Yeah. And when you hit that short wall on a skeleton sled, you get tipped up and over. And so your backside hits the adjacent wall. And so I hit that adjacent wall on the left side 7 times that week, losing my sled, not getting to finish that run. My entire left side of my body was a bruise from the top of my shoulder, my ass cheek, which can sometimes take a month for a bruise to reveal itself, was completely purple and black, down my quad, my calf, and my ankle. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified to push off from the top, because I knew that, I mean, it's not a Nintendo game. You can't press reset if you're having Mario Go Kart. This is true. Now. Yeah. Can't reset. You are, and even more so, defining and painful in a bobsled, but on a skeleton sled, you don't get buried in it, but you do get your suit melted to your skin. You do have to use friction to come to a complete stop on your toes or side or backside, wherever you are. And I did battle attrition that week. I did finally, on the last race, I did 2 complete runs. But on the first race, the first day I made it through that hard spot, was celebrating almost in my helmet. Yep. And then quarter 14 came before the chicane and smash, the same happened to me, lost my sled. So I only did 2 safe runs at the very end of the week, my last 2 race runs. I retired that sled, gave it back to its owner, and I went home. I bought some new equipment. I got a sled that summer of my own and a new helmet. I came out that next fall and I rounded a corner. I rounded a corner in terms of personal development, and I began to realize progress at a rate that I could be happy with, that I could celebrate more small victories, that I could be imbibed with more confidence through some better progression, because I was really struggling. But in that beginning, it was just the belief that I was never the worst athlete at anything in my life was all that kept me going. You know, I had always at least been average and never the worst. And I didn't believe that this was all the sport of skeleton held for me, was to be the worst. And I had to just get past that. And once I was not the worst anymore, I began to celebrate those small victories, that nuanced development, focus on the things that I wasn't doing right, but imbibe myself with that confidence for the things that were going right. And that built up like layers of an onion. Each layer, each experience, each victory adding layers of confidence to me. And that's what allowed me to continue to steadily develop for those next 7 years and progress all the way through to 2010, which is where I had to be on point and execute to the best of my ability.
Right. You said something really interesting. You just mentioned that you focused and celebrated the things that you were doing well, but didn't basically beat yourself up for the things that you weren't doing so well, correct?
No, that's where you have to focus. Your attention for improvement is on the areas where you're deficient. But if you don't celebrate the small things that you're doing right, and this is right out of one of my presentations, it's not like I'm just talking about this for the first time. This is basically the core of my public presentations, is developing self-efficacy or confidence, but this is one of the pillars. And the fact that if we don't celebrate these small victories, then there's nothing positive left, and it becomes overwhelming. And if you're looking at today's world, for instance, the pervasiveness of technology, using Zoom that we're on here right now. When I first got my first request for a podcast, it was almost so overwhelming because I was like, I have to download stuff on my computer. Like, I don't know how to do this, man.
Right.
But if I can celebrate the fact that I was able to turn my computer on, maybe I'll be able to find the resolve to learn how to download Zoom. And sure enough, Here we are. But if you don't celebrate these small victories, the world becomes unscalable pretty quick. It becomes overwhelming pretty quick because everything is so new. Everything is on hyperspeed with development and AI and whatever it is. Technology is pervasive in our lives now. So celebrate what you do, leverage now well, what you do understand, and know that you got to understand your Hotmail account before you knew it. The rest of it will reveal itself in due time. And if you just keep plugging away, you'll figure it all out. But those celebration of small victories keeps things scalable and manageable. And I needed that, especially in the beginning when everything was so new in Skeleton. Everything was overwhelming.
Yeah. I often speak a lot as well about the fact that we are so good at beating ourselves up for the things that we don't do well, and we neglect acknowledging and celebrating our successes. And, that's the thing, our ability to celebrate those successes will make a huge difference in our ability to persist, to keep on pushing, as I like to say. I'm curious, how of the people who started out with you in Skeleton, how many of them not necessarily made the Olympic team, but were still sliding come 2010?
A handful, a small handful. That was started exactly the same time I did. Maybe none. The year after, there were 2 at those 2010 games.
Right.
And one of those athletes would realize the dream of going to the games in 2014. But from when I started in 2002, 2014 was the end of the line for all of those athletes. There was only 1 left, and there was only 3 of us there in 2010.
Imagine that. So, I mean, it's important lesson, I think, for all of us, John, because when you started out, as you said, you suck. And I point that out to people all the time that, you know what, most of what we need to succeed in life is skill-based. And what do we know about skills? There are things you learn, you practice, you develop them, but initially you suck. But if you are able to kind of hang in there, keep on pushing your way, keep learning, keep celebrating the small successes, and just embrace the failure, embrace the fear, embrace the fact that, you know what, I'm not doing this thing so well now, but I can learn and get better. You can eventually become champion, as you did. The other people you started out with obviously didn't. You spoke about turning the corner in terms of personal development. They obviously didn't turn the corner in that way.
You know what? And here's the funny thing: you can become champion and not even be the best. I wasn't the best.
Hey, champion is often the guy who is the best on that day, though.
That's right. And I wasn't the best athlete in the world, though. That is, always will be, Martins Dukers of Latvia. He's the best skeleton racer of all time and one of the most dominant athletes in any sport in the world. When you're talking over the last decade, having individually won over 80 World Cup medals or something like that and 60 race victories. He is the best. But you don't have to be the best to beat the best. You just have to be the best version of yourself on the day that you deem to matter most. And in my game, I was racing the clock. I was never racing Martins Dukers. And he made one small error in 4 runs, 64 corners, 3-minute, 23.7 seconds of total sliding time. And it came down to the very final corner on the very final run. And I blink your eyes there, Devin.
Yeah, 700th of a second.
A tenth, and I won by less than the blink of an eye. 700ths of a second separates you having this conversation with somebody else today in your podcast, and me probably being on the showroom floor of the car dealership right now, hustling and selling cars. Like I.
There you go. Absolutely. So talk to me about one, what it means to you to represent your nation at the Olympic Games, and two, dude, winning on home soil.
The the desire to represent Canada was first. That started way back when I probably realized that I wasn't going to be a NHL hockey player. And I was in Barrie, Ontario, which is where I had done 3 years of schooling from 97 to 2000. I was there for the games were on in Sydney 2000, summer games. My sister was at those games because she was in Australia on a teacher exchange, and she was watching beach volleyball. And I knew she was there, and I was watching on my TV at graduation in Barrie. We'd flown up from Texas where I had continued my schooling. And it was then that I decided that I wanted to go to the games. I had the tattoo of a maple leaf on my heart. I had Canada decorated above it. I had been to the Unity Rally that we held in our country in 1995 for the Quebec referendum that decided whether Quebec was going to secede from Confederation and tear apart our entire fabric of our country and change it into something less. I'd been there as a 16-year-old, unchaperoned, with two friends that we'd traveled from Manitoba on Air Canada to go to Montreal to show our support for the no for separation. And so to give you an idea of where my head was at as a patriotic Canadian, these were the types of things that I was invested in, that I was committed to in terms of my giving of myself. And so representing Canada on the world stage was the be all and end all for me. I can't think of now anything better to do than maybe standing up for your country during an invasion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I thankfully have never had to do that. So this was the ultimate for me. Finding a vehicle like skeleton racing was the means to an end. And then that passion became an opportunity to represent my country on home soil. That you can't script that stuff, brother. That's Hollywood screenwriter stuff right there. And the fashion in which it happened, the whole playing out of the scenario, and then the beer walk.
Well, before we get to the beer walk, talk to me about the celebration, because I know there was a part of you that you felt embarrassed that you celebrated in that way because you wanted to be a gracious winner.
And we can't always control our reactions to things, and nobody expected anything different of me. But as an individual that wants to make sure that my words are considered and that I use them carefully, because words mean things, and I don't like to have my words misconstrued in their meaning, even when I'm being a herb and trying to make jokes. But nobody expected much different of me. But I did need to convey that message of apology and apologetic statement to Martins in quickly thereafter, because when somebody else loses something like Martins had just done, he was in the gold medal leader position going into the final run. He made a small driving error and lost his lead to me by the finish line. And I had a very exuberant reaction to it. I feel that that's sometimes in bad taste, to cheer overzealously for someone else's loss. Had I been in the leader position, kept it, held it, and then pumped my fist wildly when I got to the finish line in victory, nobody would have expected anything different of me. But I do expect something of myself. And maybe if I had been an observer of that, I would have been inclined to think that, that's the kind of guy that I'd like to have a pint with. Somebody that will be self-effacing and own something. And that's something that I learned growing up in Russell, Manitoba, that we have to own 110% of our actions, and we have to take responsibility for them and have ownership even for when they're not good. And I learned that growing up from my folks in small town Russell. And I did own it. And I did say sorry for that exuberant celebration. But I will never say sorry for coming for you. I will never say sorry for wanting to win. And that was something that I think changed. Canadians, we always say sorry. That shit is in our DNA. We can't stop it, but it's what we apologize for that I think is important. And I will never apologize for coming to win, for realizing something that I am wanting, desiring, and I will be vocal about that in a typically Canadian way.
So, no, I mean, I think it's, very generous, very considerate of you to be thinking about the guy who just lost the goal to you, so to speak.
You don't get to have a competition without other participants. And if it's just you and a clock and nobody to race against, boring.
Yeah, it is boring. There's no drive. There's no the passion gets lessened. And so yeah, I just see it as, you know, very spontaneous celebration, excitement, which I think all of us do. You know, if you just kind of ended up at the top of the sales leaderboard at the end of the year, you pass this guy by a buck, then I get it, because it's spontaneous. It's not that you're celebrating their loss, you're celebrating your victory.
True.
So congrats on that. So tell us about the beer walk, man.
All that stuff played out in my mind's eye, not the result, but the execution, the way
Mhm.
that I had pictured. My game plan, I executed near perfectly, and that's what I needed to be. And the rest of it was just reaction. I had been, am perhaps a bit of a character, and was lucky enough that I was at the ripe old age of 30. I was comfortable in my own skin, and certainly comfortable enough behind a microphone from having done auctioneering and being in front of an audience selling cars, to
Mhm.
be myself and to not really care or pull any punches in terms of my unbridled enthusiasm for celebrating what we had achieved together as a country with my fellow countrymen. And you're feeding off of everybody's energy in an instance like that. And
Mhm.
so I was just carrying on. And I was thinking, no, you know, it would be better than anything right now. I wasn't saying this out loud, but it was manifest destiny. I was thinking, oh, I'd love a beer. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, this ginormous pitcher just materializes out of nowhere, being held by this angelic figure that I refer to now as my beer angel. She almost
Right.
knocked out an RCMP officer, one of our cops that we got here in
Yeah.
Canada, with
Uh-huh.
this picture, and thrust it into my hand. And it was already on its way to my mouth before it even left her hand. And I drank at least a quarter of that pitcher, because in Manitoba, the only way that you can say thank you for this free beer that you've just purchased for me is to take a good hearty swill of it. And that
Yeah.
says thanks enough to the purveyor of
Indeed.
said
Yeah.
pitcher. But that was a moment that my life was pretty linear,
A
even
very
with
a very Canadian moment, I would say, right?
very Canadian moment that was the reaction or the result of a personal achievement. And what I think granted other Canadians access to that moment was me just being myself, being Johnny from Russell, Manitoba, drinking half a pitcher of beer in one foul swoop. And everybody could see themselves in that moment. Whether it was a single mom, a firefighter, a fire person, a police officer, a teacher, a custodian. Everybody can see themselves celebrating a milestone, a goal achieved, some momentous moment in their lives in a typically Canadian way with a frosty pitcher of beer. Not everybody can see themselves at the games. Not everybody can see themselves going head first down a frozen toilet chute on a crazy carpet with rails at 146 kilometers per hour. But everybody can see themselves in that moment. And I think it granted access perhaps to a moment or to me that people otherwise didn't appreciate before. And it took my life, what would have been continuing on to the medal podium, to getting the gold, to saying thank you, to something different. And when people saw that, there was maybe some remnant of me left behind. That when opportunities presented themselves down the road to have a speaker come or to maybe consider somebody for a hosting position of this show, which is celebration of our country, our resources, our people, our places, the greatest things that our country has to offer. Maybe there we can get some simple herb that we can actually get to jump off this enormous precipice with a smile on his face and go, you should try this. And they found him in me.
Yeah.
And Devin, man, I couldn't have found a sweeter gig, more tailor suited to me as an individual than to showcase Canada to Canadians in this role of host. And it's my opportunity to be a part of a team now, because I'm not an athlete anymore. I don't
Yeah.
have the crew to roll around with. So this is my connection, and I treasure it.
Pretty cool. You know, man, there's so much more I want to explore with you, but you know, I think we have to be mindful of time. We probably are going to have to do a part two. But let's talk about failure a little bit, because you know you win in 2010, and the expectation is that you're going to be in Sochi to defend, but you didn't even make the 2014 team.
That's
Talk a
right.
little.
You see the smile on my face, man?
Yeah, I see that.
I wish we could have flashed forwarded in 2014 to this moment with a smile on my face, but I'll say it to you like this. Disappointment is fleeting. Disappointment, here today, gone tomorrow.
Mhm.
Regrets?
Yes.
Regrets is, yeah, there's deep lacerations. That's the stuff that you think about on your deathbed. That's the stuff that haunts you. Regrets.
Mhm.
I have zero regrets about 2014. I didn't do everything right. No, not by any stretch of the imagination. I did a lot of things really well, but ultimately I left myself in a position to fall short of that goal of representing our Olympic gold medal and defending our country's position as Olympic champion. And I
Mhm.
didn't even get to do that because my quest for success in 2014 led me down a path to develop my own sled, my own equipment. And I said to one of my children yesterday, maybe my dog, I said, I think it was Jackson. I said, you got to learn to collaborate with people, to work together towards a goal. I said, Dad learned this the hard way. He didn't work collectively with enough people in 2014. I tried to keep things for myself because I had laid out a large portion of sweat equity, time, and investment. And when I found myself with the opportunity to collaborate, I said no because I didn't want to give everybody else all that I had worked hard for, just
Mhm.
carte blanche. And
Yeah.
that was the wrong mentality. That, I think, potentially led to my disappointment, my not being able to realize that goal of representing Canada in 2014. And it was not for the wrong reasons. I was trying to do well by me and work diligently. Like in terms of physical preparations, Devin, I was pushing faster in 2014, realizing PBs at the start than my whole career. I finished faster at
Yeah.
the age of 34 than I had been pushing even at the age of 30. But where I was deficient was in my kit, my sled. And what hindsight has proven is that I should have focused on the runners underneath the sled, the tube steel, and
Mhm.
left the sled itself alone. But I focused on the sled, didn't invest in the runners, and sadly, I wasn't comfortable enough with my equipment to have it be like an extension of my body. And that's where you need to be
Yeah.
with that sled. It needs to be a part of you. And I couldn't get there with the time that I had. And so it's unfinished business. I've still perhaps got to finish what I started and build a competitive sled. But I didn't. And I was disappointed with not going to those games in 2014, but it taught me a lot. And I take those lessons with me today and I wear them on my sleeve. And I have to own that stuff that I didn't do right.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, a really good place to end, because, when people see Olympians and especially Olympic champions, they tend sometimes to see these superhumans.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that, hey, I'm as human as you are. I have goals and dreams and aspirations, and I work hard to achieve them. And sometimes I fall short. But as you just said, disappointment is fleeting. I say failure isn't fatal.
Yeah.
And what you do is that you learn from it and you move on. But in the process, you still inspired yourself to keep moving, keep on pushing, and you inspire others to do the same. So, John, yeah, we're going to have a part two at some
I
stage.
look forward to round two, Devin.
Yeah, man. But yeah, so thank you so much for spending time with us, sharing your wisdom and your experiences, and keep on pushing.
Well, I'll tell you what, thank you very much. From a Canadian kid that watched Cool Runnings as a kid, man.
Dude, now
I
you're
didn't
making me sound old. What's going on?
I didn't even realize that I was being inspired by a story that wasn't just, something that maybe you had seen, that you were a part of. I mean, it paved the way, and having that story resonate with Canadians, being in proximity to that track in
Yeah.
Calgary, and knowing, like, I knew more about you guys than I did the Canadian program and the Canadian bobsledders. And so you really did do a lot for the sliding community, the sliding world, and Olympianism as a whole. Thank you.
Hey, it's all good, man. Thank you. Oh, it was our pleasure, although we finished on our head, but that's another story. It's been great to have you on, John. Want to wish you all the best of success in 2020. As I tell people, I'm wishing you plenty in 2020.
plenty in 2020. It's the future,
Yeah.
brother. When you say that out loud, 2020, like, where's our flying cars?
I know, exactly. But until then, hey, keep
Thank
on
you.
pushing. Thanks for watching. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you click on that subscribe button and hit that bell. You'll get a notification every time we post a new video. And don't forget, share it with your friends, man. They want to be inspired as well, right? So share it. Don't keep it. And before you go on to the next video, visit my website, www.devonharris.com. Keep on pushing.